That's a good example, Bing. Thank you. Well, welcome. Welcome, everybody. We're going to bring the conversation down. I'm John Tare, President, CEO of the Boulder Chamber. That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Henry. And welcome you all to the 2024 Economic Forecast. So as soon as Phil DeStefano gets his seat there, we'll get started. Thanks, Lori, for ushering him in. So, you know, I know that most of you have now been back at your desk for a few days and just starting to get used to answering way too many emails. I imagine many of you just had that, oh my God moment. We got to implement that 2024 strategic plan. But you know, we all know that today's economic forecast is the official kickoff to the 2024 business year. So welcome all of you to 2024. So today we look forward to sharing some economic data, demographic information that will help you to map out the path forward for the year to make sure you meet your business goals and to sustain our community's economic vitality. But, you know, I wanted to say that this year did not start out looking so very promising for myself. No, it wasn't the projected delay in interest rate reductions or the businesses that are still struggling to meet their workforce demands, or that Coach Prime keeps stealing the spotlight from me. And I'll just tell you, I mean, we can address all of those issues, and Coach Prime, I'm coming for you. No, my greatest concern was finding someone to replace the former Boulder Economic Council Executive Director who dared to come to this event, Scott Sternberg, and then who went off to the University of Colorado, as well as filling the big shoes of his predecessor, Cliff Harold, who's right here in the front room. No, the year ahead was not looking so promising for John Tare until I received this email. And I'm going to use these glasses to tell you just how close I am to 60. I'm writing to introduce myself as a candidate for the position of Vice President of Economic Vitality. I bring 20 years of experience as a high-level executive in economic development, corporate leadership, and community engagement. This experience includes working as a senior vice president for the Beacon Council, Miami's economic development organization. During my tenure, I successfully launched and led a comprehensive 5-year economic vitality plan for Miami-Dade County. This strategic plan played a pivotal role in cultivating a thriving business community and skilled workforce while driving economic prosperity for all residents in the county. I then accepted the position of Executive Director for the Alliance, the economic development organization in Fort Lauderdale. In this role, I spearheaded the Economic Vitality Initiative for Broward County. The initiative fostered collaboration throughout the community to resolve the county's most pressing economic and social challenges. Projects in workforce development, community branding, transportation, homelessness, and racial equity were launched to advance the county as an economic engine of inclusive growth and shared prosperity. The initiative has made a lasting impact on the community and was awarded the Innovative Partnership Award from the Florida Economic Development Council. This sounded too good to be true. Certainly there was some sort of AI bot at play. So just to be sure he was real, I knew I needed to meet this person. And so I did, and found him to be just the perfect fit for the character of Boulder and to meet the economic vitality needs of our community today. Oh, and though he's from Florida, he does claim that he loves to ski. And now you will get to meet him yourself and get to understand why I am so pleased to introduce our new Vice President for Economic Vitality and the new Executive Director of our Boulder Economic Council, Joe Hovanchek. Welcome to our community, Joe, and welcome to the stage, and now take it away.
Woo! All right. That was quite the introduction. I'm glad I did really good with that letter there. And let's see, they moved my papers around here. Anyway, I'm excited to be here. As John has mentioned, well, first, I just want to welcome everyone to today's Boulder Chamber's 2024 Economic Summit. This is very exciting. Day 11 for me, and on stage, so no pressure. But as John mentioned, my name is Joe Hovanchek, and I'm the new Vice President of Economic Vitality, as well as Executive Director for the Boulder Economic Council, which is right up my lane because I am an Executive Director. I've been that for the past 10 years in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, as John had mentioned. And in addition to being excited, I'm also very grateful and honored to be part of this incredible Boulder Chamber team. I've met them, they're welcoming, they're smart, and I know we're gonna do a lot of great things together. But I'm also excited to be part of this vibrant Boulder community. I had 5 states on my target list of where I was gonna go move to, and I decided I'm gonna move to a vibrant city that's close to the mountains. And I picked here, and I'm so glad I did. And I stand before you today to share in the excitement of what promises to be a very insightful and captivating event today. We have gathered here not just as business and nonprofit leaders who, with a focus on our own bottom lines, but also as a community with a shared commitment to the prosperity and to the growth of Boulder, our Boulder region, and all of Colorado. Today, we are privileged to hear from leading experts in the fields of economics and demographics, including Brian Lewandowski, Dr. Richard Wobbekind, Elizabeth Garner, and Dean Vijay Khatri. I'm very excited about these individuals, and you might know most of them, but this is the first time I'm meeting them. So as a new kid on the block, it was such a pleasure to be introduced to them. And I'm looking forward to hearing about their insights and their analysis of what lays ahead in our economic landscape. Now, as we hear their economic forecasts and the demographic data, there's a clear theme that emerges for Boulder, and that is one of change and resilience. The world around us is evolving in this post-COVID era, and with new challenges and new opportunities for our businesses, our community, and our economy, we're poised for great success. Amidst it all, again, is our business community has demonstrated remarkable resilience. We've built a solid foundation that is allowing us to forge ahead and withstand those headwinds, and they're out there. But still, this community has been resilient. And monitoring ongoing developments and adapting to changing circumstances will be crucial for us to continue successfully navigating the ever-changing economic landscape. Now, one of the key highlights we're going to explore today is the positive growth, job growth that is set to define our economic condition for the coming years. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics Local Area Unemployment Statistics Program reports that despite an increase compared to the same time last year, Boulder's unemployment rate remains nearly a full percentage point below the national average and is well below the state average. While clearly highlighting the workforce challenges we need to confront, the overall unemployment is up 2% on the year, demonstrating again the resiliency of our labor market. So now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Our first guest is a distinguished professor, Professor Vijay Khatri. He is the endowed dean of the Leeds School of Business at the University of Colorado Boulder. And Professor Khatri, as the first holder of the endowed deanship, brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the academic realm. His role as a professor of information analytics is underscored by a profound dedication to understanding and navigating the complexities of the information economy. An educator and with remarkable accomplishments, Professor Khatri has demonstrated exceptional leadership in student success, research advancement, and initiatives promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Professor Khatri's dedication to education has been acknowledged with over a dozen prestigious awards, and it's my pleasure, and please give a warm welcome to Professor Khatri.
Thank you very much. I'd like to first thank the Boulder Chamber of Commerce for inviting me as well as my colleagues. Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to serve as the Dean of the 8th oldest business school in the country with an unparalleled legacy of excellence. So I just want to give you a little bit shout out to my school, and I want to describe that, and also I want to share with you where we are in the strategic journey. With respect to Leeds, I just want to share just a few things. I know we are supposed to be talking about statistics and numbers, so I think I should be talking about a few numbers as well. So recently, there were rankings, and we were ranked as 29th school in the nation. So that's and if you were to think about all the business schools in the country, we have 968 accredited business schools in the country. So Leeds is among the top 3% of all business schools in the country. Since we are on numbers, I should probably continue with one more number, and then I'll share a story with you. So Stanford, they released the year's list of top 2% scientists all over the world. So it's not only in US, all over the world. 349 of those top 2% researchers are in CU Boulder, and 6 of them are in Leeds. All right, I guess I should now end with the bragging with a story. And the story is really about, so earlier last year, the Buffs, they participated in University of Chicago trading competition. So this is a competition wherein the students are asked to develop algorithms to make automated trading decisions. So I'm going to give you names of other schools that participated in this competition. Most of the schools were small-time names, like University of Chicago, Dartmouth, Duke, Michigan, Notre Dame, UPenn, Princeton, Stanford. I think you get and the Buffs. The first place team were 2 students, each from engineering and the business school, and they were Buffs, obviously. The number 2 place team was Chicago, and number 3 place team was Johns Hopkins, just so you know. All right, I want to wrap up with giving you just a little bit overview about where we are in the Leeds strategy journey. So we're calling our North Star as 2035 Leeds. Where would Leeds be in the next 10 years? I know we are still about 8 to 10 months away from the actual strategic initiatives that we would be undertaking as a part of our strategy, but I can share with you some of the priorities that are emerging. I'll share with you 4 priorities that are emerging. The first one is with respect to education experiences. So think of all those 4 priorities. I would say think of those priorities as yin and yang. So these are mutually reinforcing priorities. So the first one is education experiences. So we want to engage in providing cutting-edge learning opportunities, both in class as well as lifelong learning. Now, the yang for this is how do we provide experiential opportunities, and that is where the community comes into play. So we also want to provide our students with outstanding experiential opportunities. The reason why this is yin and yang is that when a student gets an amazing opportunity, an experiential opportunity, the way they learn in the class completely changes. And we want the 2 things to happen in concert. The second one is related to innovation. So we obviously want to engage in innovation that is disciplinary in nature. At the same time, we also want to do cutting-edge interdisciplinary work. When our faculty members are doing research that is at the cusp of marketing and technology, or when they're working at the cusp of finance and sustainability, that really is about interdisciplinary work. And every time a finance faculty is engaged in interdisciplinary work, they're also influencing the discipline. The third one is sort of like a word play, and we're calling it glocal. So we want our students to be engaged in focused global engagement. So later this semester, our students will actually be going to 12 different countries, again, exploring the world. We also want our students to not only explore the world, but they should come in and they should show exemplary commitment to transform our own communities. So think again of those as yin and yang, so they go together. And the last one is the community of care. So we want to inculcate an unparalleled inclusive excellence, so that's really an intrinsic to our goal. And the second piece is that we really want to have an expansive belonging. So it's not just about the community, thinking about it in a smaller sense, but also how we think about community in a bigger sense and how we connect with the rest of the world. So that's all that I had with respect to 2035 Leeds. I'm really, really excited to be part of the community, and this is so exciting. So thank you again for inviting me.
You know what's incredible about the vibrant city here with the diverse industries and the quality of life and the outdoor recreation is that there is a major research university. I can't tell you how many cities would love to have something like this in their backyard. So we are so privileged because you think about a pipeline of great talent and research, and thank you, Professor, for that, those numbers and those little schools that were out there. But again, round of applause for Vijay. So now I'm thrilled to announce that we will be hearing from two distinguished economists, Brian Lewandowski and Dr. Richard Wobbekind, whose names are synonymous with expertise and foresight. They will be unraveling the latest economic trends that will undoubtedly have a significant impact on our local business landscape. But wait, there's more. We are also fortunate to be joined by State Demographer Elizabeth Garner. Elizabeth brings a wealth of knowledge, and today she will be providing us with the most up-to-date economic statistics and population trends specifically tailored for the Boulder area. Now, please note that as part of the Boulder's commitment to sustainability, paper programs will not be provided, but you can access our digital program by simply scanning the QR code here and also on the tables. Now, I've also been informed that many of you might have sponsored the Chamber or you do sponsorships yourself, and you know how important our sponsors are to have successful events like this, and clearly you understand their importance. We want to express our sincere gratitude to the companies and organizations that are making this year's economic forecast possible. So we're going to take a moment quickly to acknowledge our sponsors. Today's presenting sponsor is Elevations Credit Union. Elevations is an award-winning Colorado institution who empowers their members with education and solutions, including checking, savings, home lending, and business banking. Our community sponsor is the City of Boulder. Our supporting sponsors are Berg Hill, Greenleaf, and Residi, BOK Financial, iBailey, Plant Moran, and the University of Colorado Boulder. And our contributing sponsors are Flatirons Crossing and 29th Street. And wrapping up our media sponsors, Daily Cama and BizWest. Please join me in thanking all of tonight's sponsors. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the elected officials joining us here tonight. Please stand so we can properly recognize you. We are expecting officials from our congressional delegation, state legislature, Boulder County Commissioners, and the Boulder City Council. There you are. And we just want to simply thank you. Your investment of time and resources in supporting the community, your participation today, the business leaders, nonprofit leaders, academic leaders, the nonprofit leaders, your participation is what makes a difference. And as we rally together as a community, that's when the magic happens. So thank you so much for being here today. Now, to help introduce today's keynote speakers, please welcome an accomplished business leader, a dedicated community champion. He injured his foot skydiving, but that's okay, he's still here. Dennis Paul, Vice President of Government Affairs and Strategic Partnerships of Elevations Credit Union. We are also grateful that Elevations is our presenting sponsor for today. Come on over, Dennis. Over to you. You are welcome.
I'd actually planned on running up and jumping on stage, but that'll be for another time. So, Joe, you're a skier. We should talk. I can't wait to ski with you. It's just going to be a while. Before we get too far into this thing, I think we need to do an audience participation. So I want to, on the count of three, we want to say the word glocal, because that's a word that really was inspiring to me. So 1, 2, 3, glocal. That's a good word, Dean. We appreciate that. Well, thank you, Joe, and welcome to Boulder. You make a perfect addition to the high-performance staff at the Boulder Chamber and the Boulder Economic Council. On behalf of our board of directors and our leadership team at Elevations, we welcome you. Elevations, as we enter our 73rd year on the Front Range of Colorado, is a full-service financial cooperative that banks over 1/3 of the households in Boulder County. We pride ourselves in being consumer-centric, an organization that works together with our members to create solutions for a better life. From commercial lending to mortgage lending to business banking, as well as a broad array of consumer financial solutions, we're a one-stop shop for over 175,000 of your friends and neighbors. I encourage you to check us out at elevationscu.com. Additionally, since its inception in 2010, Elevations Foundation has provided over $4 million in funding for community initiatives in the service area of the credit union. So it's a pleasure to be part of that organization, and as always, it's a pleasure to support the Chamber. Thank you, Lori. That's awesome. Economic forecasting. Where's Brian and Dr. Wobbekind? What exciting images the words often conjure up. Words like exhilarating and riveting come to mind. But also words like uncertainty and instability come to mind as we think about the economic forecasting season we're in. These words are not too far off given the environment in which we live and work in 2024. The interest rate environment, the housing market, the Dow closing at over 37,000 points on a regular basis. More than half of the chief economists expect the global economy to weaken in 2024, with 7 in 10 saying the pace of geoeconomic fragmentation will accelerate. This according to the latest chief economics forecast. But economies like politics are often local. So today we get a nice look at the local and state economies. I do take solace in knowing that we have our very own team of top economists here tonight to unpack the mysteries that abound. Tonight's keynote speakers are two respected figures in our community who business leaders throughout the state turn to for the quantitative data they need to do their jobs. It is always my honor to introduce Dr. Richard Wobbekind, Associate Dean for Business and Government Relations, Senior Economist and Faculty Director of the Business Research Division at the University of Colorado. Is that all on your card, by the way, or were you able to condense that a little bit? That would be a heck of an acronym. Rich joined the faculty at the Leeds School of Business in 1985 and has served as an Associate Dean since 2000. Truly a seasoned professional. We're thrilled to have you, Rich. Following Dr. Wobbekind's presentation, we will hear from Brian Lewandowski, the Executive Director of the Business Research Division at Leeds School. Brian provides regional business and economic information and education, including economic and revenue forecasts, policy studies, economic impact analysis, and data workshops throughout the state. This is truly the dream team when it comes to economic forecasting. CU's Business Research Division is responsible for developing an annual consensus forecast of the Colorado economy and performs various economic impact assessments of the Colorado economy. The office also produces the quarterly Leeds Business Confidence Index for Colorado, of which many of you participate in. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wobbekind and Brian Lewandowski. First up, though, is Rich. Come and join us, Rich. Thank you so much.
great to be back on the home turf. So it's wonderful to be here. I always wonder coming up here what I'm going to say that's going to get me in trouble. And Dennis gave me lots of ammunition, calling me doctor numerous times. And some of you have heard this joke a long time ago, but my older daughter, who I'll talk about here in a moment, she was screening calls from a financial institution. It could have been Elevations, calling our house, and the person on the phone said, "Is he a doctor? Is he really a doctor?" And she said, "Yes, but not the kind that helps people." It just made me think of it when you just kept calling me doctor. Just, you know. So I'm not the kind that helps people. Let's move along, move along from here. And I have to tell you just really quickly, since you highlighted Glocal. So Dean Khatri was running this past me, and he hands me the sheet, and I looked down at the sheet, and before he could say anything, I saw Glocal, and I said, "This guy's so good in technology," and he misspelled the word. So I was really kind of surprised by that. I'm also surprised that everybody's smiling on the slides. It's an economic forecast, and you just gave a lot of pessimism about where we're going. So, but we'll go from there. And then I'd also like to do just a quick warning. I made this comment last week, and I realized I've been talking to just an inordinate amount of accounting groups, and they actually think I have a good personality. So just remember that as we go forward. Okay, so with that, as you heard, Brian and Elizabeth, our dear friend, are going to be presenting after I do the front piece. I'm going to talk about the national economy relatively quickly and lead into our state forecast. I'll make some comments along the way. And Brian's going to pick it up from there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get there. So, I mean, it would be crazy not to say that the U.S. economy overperformed in terms of GDP in 2023. I don't recall a single forecast that was over 1.5% this time a year ago for forecasting for the 2023 year. And we're going to come out of the year over 2%. On this particular graphic, it's 2.9% year over year through the third quarter, but it's probably going to end up the year around 2.5% based on what we can see in terms of fourth quarter data. You can also see that in this era of uncertainty, we do a lot of forecasting. We use Moody's and others forecast pieces to sort of think about scenarios. And again, it's built on this whole concept of uncertainty, a great degree of uncertainty. And if there wasn't enough uncertainty in the things I'm going to talk about here shortly, it's a political election year, and it looks to be a divisive political election year. So that adds sort of one more element of concern to the broader picture. So when we look at these, people kept saying a year ago, are we going into a recession? When are we going into a recession? And so on and so forth. It is fortunate we've kind of moved away from that mentality. We're not seeing nearly as much discussion of recessions now. People seem to be a little bit more optimistic that we're going to go into this soft landing. But again, the soft landing is going to be a GDP growth rate that's around 1%. It's not going to be anything that's particularly strong. Slower than 2023 and generating slower economic activity all the way down to the state level. So this is the mixed signals we talk about all the time. A number of these are used in sort of calculating whether or not we're in a recession. And clearly, with the level of employment and income and also the GDP numbers, we really just aren't getting into recessionary territory. Talk more about that in just sort of a moment. But this is the concerns, and this is adapted from a slide from Moody's Analytics. When we look at the overall picture, there are so many risks that are sitting out there, and we try to put some sort of a likelihood of the risk happening and the severity of how much it would impact the economy. And you can see all these different types of things that are out there, some of which are, overlap, if you will. But you can see all the things that are out there. At the very end, at least according to Moody's, is artificial intelligence. But we focus internally, we discuss the four things that are in red, that we've put in red as the most of most concern for us when we're looking at the macroeconomy in the year ahead. And at the top of the list there is consumption growth. Can the consumer possibly continue to spend at the rate they've been spending? And the reason that GDP growth was higher than anticipated is that through 2023, we did see them spending at that kind of a level. In fact, the holiday numbers just came out, retail sales numbers, and they were very strong. Talk a little bit more about how that happened in a short moment, but they were very, very strong. So can the consumer continue with this? Working from home, you'd say, well, why is that a risk? It's a risk because it feeds down into the commercial real estate crisis. Whether or not it turns into a serious crisis, there are people in this room that know more about this topic than I do, but it's a rolling sort of refinancing of a lot of buildings. The good news is, as reported, there are numbers of funds that have been raised on Wall Street to jump in and buy these buildings when they go under. That's the good news. The bad news is some financial institution or insurance company is sitting on the other end of those transactions if, in fact, those buildings go down. So it could be a bumpy ride, and that's part of what we're concerned about. And as I'm sure a lot of people saw, made a lot of headlines in different types of newspapers in the past week or so. The commercial vacancy rate is at an all-time high based on the measurements for the nation as a whole, office space in particular. So when we look at that, it certainly is something that we're paying a lot of attention to in that transition. And then the debt ceiling, God love them, they're going to shut the country down again tomorrow. So, just get on the boat and figure this out. But the combination of shutting the country down, but beyond shutting the country down, the actual level of federal debt is just gargantuan at this point. And so we have a lot of concerns about that and the impact of that on the financial markets over the longer run. So looking at things like employment, let me just talk about this a little bit. First of all, obviously it's much higher than it was pre-COVID. That's great news. I'll show a couple of slides that relate to that in just a minute. But when we look at this particular slide, if you trended it, you would see that, in fact, we really are below 2 to 3 million jobs below where we would have been had we not had the COVID downturn. You look at that and you say, well, Rich, come on, 3.7, 3.8% unemployment rate. Where are these people coming from? And they're coming from all the people who stepped out of the workforce when COVID hit and didn't come back, or other areas. And Elizabeth probably can address this or will address this as we go along. So in my particular case, COVID comes to the Leeds School of Business, and Rich is not even remotely the oldest person in the building. COVID ends, Rich is the oldest person in the building. So I take this very personally. All of a sudden, he's the elder statesman of the Leeds School of Business. Like, come on, I'm not that old. Come on, give me a break. Well, it's okay. We'll talk more later. So again, remarkably, we had a great recovery and a quick recovery in terms of how quickly we got the jobs back. I joke about this. $6 trillion of stimulus can do an awful lot in the economy, and we certainly had a lot of stimulus, but we did get results. We did get people back working, but we got the excesses that we've been dealing with more recently. Interestingly enough, if you break out sort of the industries into types of industries like wholesale and the types of industries that are in offices and so on, the fastest growing group of jobs is in the office space. So it really highlights the fact that we have this very large office vacancy rate. At the same time, we're generating all these office types of jobs, and really shows that kind of transition to working from home or different types of arrangements in terms of hoteling in the office space or whatever it might be, but needing less of that office space even with that large job growth. One way we typically focus or look at the shortage of labor is looking at a survey that comes out monthly called the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, or JOLTS as economists like to refer to it. And at its peak, we had very high number of jobs jobs available to unemployed, that has gotten better. It's one of the goals of the Fed policy has been to close down that sort of, quote, excess demand for labor. And nationally, that number has come down to the 1.5 and then to the 1.4 range, which was pretty positive. On the right-hand side, you have Colorado, and Colorado is hovering around 1.9 still, somewhere in the 1.9 range. So we have quite a bit, the labor force in Colorado is quite a bit tighter, and again, you'll hear more about that from the next two presenters. So when we look at the basic picture again, the macro picture, we like to talk about things like income and savings. And we were very concerned a year ago, and it is actually what drove our forecast and many forecasts in the country for the macro economy, was the fact that savings had gone negative in 2022, and we thought the consumers completely tapped out and there's no way they can keep buying. But they certainly figured out a way to keep buying. And now, even optimistically, there's even a little bit of savings growth in the economy, so maybe that helps that sector stay up. More to come in the next couple of slides. Where it's really come from, of course, is a growth in personal income that has been driven by employee compensation. The red graphic in the upper left-hand corner is by far the big dog if you think of where personal income comes from. You can also see proprietor income, individual proprietor income at record levels down in the kind of tannish color corner. And in dividends, interest, and rents at very, very high levels, record-setting levels. So all of these things have really driven the consumer's ability or the household's ability to buy. Transfer payments have stabilized, but you can see they've stabilized at a level that is higher than it was pre-COVID. This is part of the controversy that's going on in Washington. You know, how come the transfer payments have gone up so significantly if you have or stayed high, if you will, if you have 3.7% unemployment in the economy. All of that fed into very strong retail sales, and you can see the numbers at the end there. The December 2023 retail sales are up 5.9% year over year, only 0.1% month over month. But what we're trying to highlight here on this particular graphic is that it appears that we're on a whole new trend line for consumption. I mean, we thought we knew how to buy before COVID. Now we really know how to buy. Like, we've really locked in. We've figured out we can buy services, we can buy goods, we can really buy a lot of stuff. So more about that as we come along. By the way, there are camper trailers and trampolines for sale in my neighborhood. If you have anybody you want to come and haul these things out, that would be great. Probably raise my home value. It's okay. So when we're looking at household debt growth, you would have anticipated the black increases in home mortgages. They relate back to when the mortgage rates were lower, and we saw a big surge up in that. And again, this is quarterly data. You can see consumer credit rising, still positive month over quarter changes, but at smaller levels, if you will, because as a percent of disposable income. The more recent data in this area is a little bit more disturbing. The credit card data, particularly the revolving credit card data, was extremely high in November. The additions to revolving credit, the additions to buy now, pay later types of arrangements was up significantly. So it appears that we're seeing a little bit of a surge, if you will, in people buying more on credit cards, and other types of forms. A slide that I don't actually have in here, but credit card delinquencies are up, and also auto loan delinquencies are going up. So we are starting to see a little bit of weakness, kinks in the armor, if you will. So here's the consumer credit overall, and this is highlighting what I was just saying previously, and the revolving credit on the far right-hand side. You can see the month-over-month change in the revolving credit for November, anticipating a similar number for December, given the strong retail sales numbers we saw for the month of December. So moving on briefly to inflation, this number is down. It's looking a little better. The number that came out last week at the national level and for the mountain states, you'll see that on the next slide, was up a little bit at the national level. It caused a little bit of concern. I'll come back to that in a moment. But I show this slide. I talked to my wife about this, and I said, this is where I really get in trouble. This is how I get in trouble. I start talking about my family, and then people know my family. So let me just say, I made the mistake of saying, yeah, inflation's doing much better, and my wife said, you don't buy the groceries, and she just kind of gave me the standard, blurted at me, earlier in the week. If you bought the groceries, you would know that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so anyway, please don't tell her. So when we look at the picture, consumer prices down, and in particular, what we're more encouraged about actually is producer prices on the right-hand side, sort of the wholesale prices in the economy, seemingly much more in check. They have ticked up a little bit, but again, going back all the way to March of 20, that's basically on a flat line. So that's an encouraging sign, if you will. If you look at the most recent, U.S. city average, and then you take the mountain region, both of those are December numbers. You take Denver, Aurora, Lakewood, 4.5%, and you once again see that we are ahead of the nation in terms of our inflation rate. I'll show you that in a little bit more detail very quickly here on another slide. But when we're looking at this, I really want to draw your attention to the third line down, which is in bolded text. At the housing piece, 44.4% of the CPI is in housing. And when we look at the housing piece, you can see for the U.S. city average, that was at 4.8%. So there's been a lot of analysis of this report that came out last week, but if you took the housing piece out of the CPI, the national rate of inflation is down in the 2.4% range. So again, housing seems to be the crux of the matter, and if you look over at the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood, the proxy for Colorado, you can see 5.8%. That's certainly an area where we're higher than the nation, and certainly part of the reason why we continue to have higher overall inflation rates than the country as a whole. This is based on rental rate equivalents. We know that the rental market has remained, rates have remained high, so you can sort of get that proxy. So here's the last 14 years, courtesy of my colleague Brian. The last 14 years we've seen of U.S. versus Denver, Aurora, Lakewood inflation. 11 years, we're higher than the country as a whole. The 12th year, we tie with the country. And there are 2 years out of the last 14 years that we had a lower inflation rate than the U.S. did. So it gives you an idea of the types of things that were going up. I should have said this really quickly when I was here. So I spoke last week to a group, and it was followed by a medical healthcare panel. And so I just highlighted the fact under Denver, Aurora, Lakewood that 6.5 was the number for medical. That really set a nice tone for their panel. They're not inviting me back. So continuing out and just sort of closing out, paying hopefully very good attention to the time here. When we're looking at interest rates in the year ahead as we go forward, a couple of quick comments here. One, we're seeing interest rates come down. You've seen this, especially the long-term rates come down. That seems to be getting a little bit more under control. That's good news in the overall scheme of things. The short-term rates, Fed funds rate, I'm still strongly of the belief we'll be lucky if we see anything before the third quarter. Don't see enough weakness in the economy overall for the Fed to have to react to that. And with the inflation number staying somewhat stubborn up in that close to 4 range, 3.8% range, I think they'll probably stay the course. I don't expect any increases, but I don't expect decreases anytime soon. And it certainly looks like the financial markets are pricing in decreases on a more rapid pace than I'm telling you right now. So this is a little bit of concern perhaps for the financial markets, particularly for the stock market as we go forward. But you get the sort of the general sense, and there's some belief in some quarters we'll get the mortgage rates down below 6% and into the high 5s in the next year or so. That would probably or should make a really significant difference in terms of housing demand. We look at confidence, the last couple of comments here, and we continue to have this sort of pessimistic view from consumers. We also have it from virtually every business survey is neutral to negative that we see. And it's a lingering effect. There's a lot of different opinions on why this is happening. Maybe my colleagues will talk a little bit more about that. But certainly the inflation impact has lagged a lot in terms of influencing confidence. And now there's a sense of maybe I'm not going to have the same standard of living. What we've heard from several people who have sort of studied this is that the world at heart, or the younger people are starting to see that or believe that they're not going to have the same standard of living that their parents had, or it's going to be harder to get there. And so it's just sort of weighing after this high inflation environment and housing affordability being as weak as it is. This is our own Leeds Business Confidence Survey that was mentioned earlier. Our first quarter we released a week ago, and it is still in negative territory. The second quarter out went into positive territory on many of the indicators and gave us some optimism that businesses were finally thought we were turning the corner. That's good news. We think that Colorado has been in good shape for a while, quite a while. But again, it's this lingering effect of high interest rate environment, inflationary pressures, tight workforce, all of those types of things weighing on the minds of business. So you can see our forecast if you online there's a PDF for our annual forecast booklet, which is pictured here. The cover is pictured here. And you could get to that and anything else that we do if you scan this QR code. And I'm just doing this because my family believes that I'm the only one in the world that doesn't know how to use a QR code. I am so bad with QR codes, it's pathetic. I don't even get my phone camera up in time, and people take this off the screen, so you have this here. But you could also join in and participate in our Business Confidence Index that was mentioned earlier, and we would love to have more participants in that area. So moving very quickly to the beginning of Colorado before I pass the baton, here's our ranking slide. We produce this every year, and you can see whether it's a one-year change or a rate or a current level. And a few years back when we were doing these presentations, we had Colorado in the top 10 or 15 in all the, almost every category. Certainly in terms of population growth, something you'll hear more about. We tended to be a rapidly growing state. Certainly in terms of employment growth, we were a solid state. And now you get kind of a mixed bag. And one of them numbers that looks bad here is the employment number in terms of the ranking. You're going to hear a lot more about that and what the expectations are for that from Brian here in about 5 minutes or less. One of the sort of great news pieces is the third line up from the bottom. The labor force participation rate continues to be the 4th highest in the country. We legalized marijuana and everybody thought no one would work anymore. And it turns out we have the 4th highest labor force participation. So go figure, it's labor force participation highly correlated to education level, and as many of you know, 2nd highest college education level attainment in the country in Colorado. So very highly educated workforce, and that's great news. And then as you look at the bottom, also something you're going to hear more from Brian here shortly. If you look at the bottom, you can see that FHFA home price, one is the highest appreciation. So you can see those home price indexes have fallen fairly significantly, and that probably bodes well for housing affordability with some sort of lag. It doesn't show up immediately, but hopefully that will help a little bit with rental rates and some of the affordability down the line. So this is the forecast we went out with in December when we released the forecast, and we came off of the best year in history in 2022. 2021 had been very strong, 2022 even stronger, and then you can see our 2023 number that we're estimating with the help of the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment at 64,500, about 2% job growth, and then dropping in 2024, this year, to 1.4%. But record levels in terms of people employed in the right-hand graphic, labor force size has never been larger, so you can see a lot of, I think, very positive indicators. When you look at this picture, you can see the jobs that are, sectors that we think are going to add jobs and the sectors that we think are going to lose jobs. And looking at that, you can see financial activities, information, manufacturing, and construction. Some of the sectors that seem to be most related to interest rates are being impacted the most. Now, I do want to highlight something. I didn't really mention this when we were at the when I was discussing the employment at the national level. Very strong year for employment growth at the national level in 2023, far exceeded expectations. 2.8 million, I believe, was the final number. But I would highlight to you that 75% of the jobs for the entire year were in 3 sectors of the economy. So if you want to look at this as a glass, half empty kind of approach, it was great job growth, but the jobs were concentrated in 3 sectors: government, leisure and hospitality, and healthcare. So when you look at that, you'd say, well, it was great job growth, but it wasn't as balanced as you might like. You'd like to see all sectors sort of prospering. And we have similar sorts of numbers here looking at ours in terms of government, education, and leisure and hospitality continuing to be big contributors. So with that, I am pleased to pass the baton to my colleague, Brian Lewandowski, to give you the next piece of the discussion.
All right. Thanks, Rich, for providing that national context. And I'll tell you, if it's not nerve-wracking enough to present with your boss, we also have my boss's boss in the room. Thank you, Dean Khatri, and my boss's boss's boss in the audience. So Rich whispered, "Don't screw it up." We come here and we share this economic forecast with you, and we really try and make it educational every year and hopefully teach you something new that you didn't know. And I'm going to start by talking about employment revisions, which is a little bit in the weeds. But I'll tell you, as we were wrapping up our forecast last December, we walked into January, and we were talking about Colorado possibly being a top 10 or top 20 state for employment growth in 2023. And then the January numbers came out and the February numbers came out, and Colorado just really sank in the rankings. We went from being, say, a top 10 state to being a bottom 10 state. And we've hovered in those rankings between 35 and 49 all year long, and we're looking around the Colorado economy thinking, gosh, it seems like things are better here than what's being reported in the data. And it's true that there have been some data issues with the labor data. And we pay close attention to this because it really impacts our modeling. So there's 2 data sets. There's one that's reported monthly, and it only lags by a month. You're going to get a new Colorado jobs report tomorrow from the State Labor Office that is estimated by the federal government using models. And then there's a second data set that lags about 6 months. And that second data set has about a 99% reporting rate. So it's really good, comprehensive data in the economy. And what that data suggests is that in June, the Colorado employment numbers were underreported by about 40,000 jobs. And when we zoom in on Denver on the right-hand side, it shows that Denver was underreported by about 45,000 jobs. meaning that some of the other areas will be revised down just a bit. But that's really remarkable. One, it's a great service that our state labor office provides by telling us about these expected revisions. But I don't remember any point where the estimates have diverged so much. And it leads to maybe some concerns for Colorado citizens who are looking at this data, wondering if Colorado's economy is really slowing down or really slowing down ahead of the nation. So to put this into perspective, right now we're at 1.1%. In November, year over year, that ranked us 37th. When we add on these expected revisions, that moves us up anywhere between about 16th and 24th nationally. So doing much better than that headline number. And when we take a look at this by metropolitan area across the state, so there's about 390 metro areas across the country. The red bars are showing Colorado's 7 MSAs and where we rank. Fort Collins looks like it's doing pretty good. It's about a top 20 metro area nationally. Boulder MSA shows up in the top quartile. Colorado Springs shows up in the top quartile. But it looks a little bimodal in Colorado, right? So there's all of these MSAs that look like they're really underperforming. But just as the state's going to be revised, that will be spread around the metro areas too. And the blue bars show what their ranking would be with the expected revisions. So, Colorado Springs moves way up. Fort Collins stays about where they were. Greeley went from being a real underperformer to being a leading metro area in the country. And there's only one MSA that may be revised down a little bit. It is Boulder. It's expected to go from maybe about 2.5% to 2%, which is still pretty stellar growth, and it's above the average for the MSAs around the country. So I have the privilege of localizing this story a little bit and talking about the Boulder economy. And again, another just informational piece. I know we stand up here and talk about metropolitan areas or MSAs, and some of you might wonder, what the heck are they talking about when they say an MSA? So there are about 390 of these nationally. The definition is on the right. It's a community with 50,000 or more people at the county level. So the smallest unit is a county. It can be many counties, like the Denver MSA has 10 counties in the MSA. They're named after the principal city. But I think what's interesting, taking a look at this map of Colorado, is just sort of putting this into context a little bit. Boulder County, the Boulder MSA, has about 330,000 people. If you zoom out a little bit and take a look at Denver Boulder MSAs, that's about 3.3 million people. And then if you zoom out a little bit more and just take a look at the Metropolitan Front Range, not including Mesa out on the western slope, that's about 85% of Colorado's population that lives in about 20% of the land mass. So it's very concentrated. Our population, our economy, our jobs are very concentrated along this Metropolitan Front Range. So that's what I'm referring to when I talk about MSAs. And I like to benchmark. I like to benchmark Boulder against all of those other 390 MSAs and just sort of keep track of how we're doing. And this gives you a little bit of a long-run view and a short-run view of how Boulder is doing. And so there are some of these metrics where we're performing, pretty well. Real GDP growth, we're about 11th. In terms of the labor metrics, we're in the top quartile pretty easily. When you take a look at the income components, we're clearly leading the nation in Boulder County. But a couple of these where we're lagging a little bit is population growth and home price growth right now. So more of that to come over the next few minutes. So here's Boulder's employment as of November. You will get a new jobs number tomorrow, but even with the expected revision, we are at an all-time high in Boulder County for jobs. We've never seen this level of jobs before. And the growth rate is still pretty good, 2 to 2.5%. That's 4,000 to 5,000 jobs that we added year over year. And this same story is true for the city of Boulder. Record number of jobs that we've ever measured. Clearly recovered from the pandemic, tracking the state when it comes to job growth overall. And then when we take a look at labor force growth, Labor force growth, we rank about in the top quartile or so. 3% growth, which is really remarkable when you think about the slow rate of population growth in Boulder County. So our population growth over the last 2 years, 2 years ago it was 0.1% population growth. Last year it was 0.2% population growth, give or take. I'm looking at Elizabeth. She's like, that's incredibly wrong, Brian. But think about how can we possibly grow labor force at 3% when we're not bringing in that many people, when we don't have the kind of population growth that can support this. And this goes back to what Rich was saying about just sort of bringing people in from the sidelines. And we do have this really high labor force participation rate. Perhaps another question for Elizabeth is, so how do we do it? Is it a matter of people having to work more in Colorado because of the cost of living? Is it because we're a younger state than average nationally? What are the factors that allow Colorado to have this high labor force participation rate? Our unemployment rate is pretty good too. If you take a look at Boulder County against all of those 390 MSAs, 2.8%. We're lower than the state, we're lower than the nation, and we are tied with Fort Collins for the lowest rate among the Colorado MSAs. So again, tight labor market here. Rich showed you the job openings number. There's still way more demand than supply of workers. So if you're an employer out there and you're thinking that it's going to get a lot easier in 2024, I wouldn't hold your breath. I think even if there's a recession, I don't think that will solve the labor issues that we're experiencing right now. Wage growth. This was sort of interesting to me when I was looking at it today. The Boulder MSA has much more volatile wage growth than the state and the nation. And the good news, it's a good news, bad news story. It's a good news if you're an employee that there's high wage growth right now. It's bad news if you're an employer. But the other good news piece of this, at least, is that we're seeing real wage growth. We're seeing wage growth outpacing inflation now over the last few months. So that's a welcome piece of news. So I got asked by a reporter very recently. She asked me, what drives the Boulder economy? She wanted a single answer, like which industry drives the Boulder economy? And so I pulled up my location quotient. So this is showing where we have a much higher concentration of jobs in Boulder than we do compared to the nation. And so I'm like, well, we're really strong in information and professional and technical services. We have a lot of R&D jobs, software jobs, engineering jobs. We're pretty good at manufacturing, high-tech aerospace manufacturing and food and beverage and so on. And then I started talking about clusters, aerospace and bioscience and IT. And she's like, but what's the one driver? I'm like, well, it's sort of all of these. And I said, oh, but by the way, we incubate a lot of businesses. We have a really thriving startup community. Now we're into AI and we're into quantum. She's like, but what's the one thing? Like, I don't think there is one thing that I can really describe. And it takes me back to the innovation report that we did with the Boulder Economic Council several years ago that we continued to update. But thinking about what brought people to Boulder originally, right? The place brought people to Boulder, and the people make Boulder what it is, right? So people brought with them the research and development. They brought with them the investment. That in turn led to the thriving economy. All of these things are intertwined and sort of feed and propel each component. And I do think we have a really special economy in Boulder. And so it's not just a single answer like some other economies that you can point to around the country about what's driving things. So Boulder, I won't pretend that things are all rosy here because there are some warning signs, right? So this is Boulder's November employment change. On the left-hand side, you have the 11-month year-to-date data, comparing it year over year. And on the right side, there's a 1-month year-over-year change. And I put both of these up here to show you that it's not a single month trend where we're seeing some of these job losses. So financial activities is under pressure a little bit. We've seen a real decrease in banking deposits nationally, statewide, in Boulder. That's happened. We've seen a decrease in venture capital investment. That's happening. Professional and business services, this is one of our key industries here. Professional, scientific, and technical, that R&D development that keeps Boulder so strong. That's been losing some jobs in Boulder. Trade, transportation, and utilities, particularly in retail trade, and then the information sector. So I'm going to be watching for revisions in these to see if Boulder props up a little bit, but these are the areas of concern that I'm looking at. I'm going to talk about two sectors of the economy before I close. I'm going to talk about construction and real estate, and then I'm going to talk about the consumer in Boulder. So construction employment, I've talked a lot about employment revisions. Construction statewide is an industry that's expected to be revised up a little bit, but note that the trend is still pointing downward. When we take a look at real estate, this is one where it looks like there's a real data anomaly earlier in 2022 that's been corrected, but it looks like it's tracking pretty true to form. A correction has sort of already happened in real estate employment. Nationally, when we take a look at the construction industry, we can take a look at construction value of construction put in place, and we see that there is a correction in the residential sector in 2023, down about 6.6%. But what's interesting is seeing how non-residential just continued to propel forward in 2023, up about 19%. And that brought the overall value of construction positive for the year. And when we delve into the components of that non-residential piece, it was pretty much across the board growth in non-residential construction put in place. It was driven by manufacturing, which I think was driven in large part by tax incentives that were in place, and I think they expired at the end of 2023, but see how manufacturing just surged ahead of all of the other sectors last year. You'll note as you read down this list that a lot of this is sort of infrastructure related, so not by accident. I think there's more of this to be expected over the coming years. When we do take a look at value of construction put in place, just mind you that this is activity that's happened. So it's today and looking backward. When we zoom into Colorado, we take a look at value of construction using a different data source, and this is really what's to come, because this is the permits that have been pulled on projects. And so perhaps this is a little bit of a leading indicator, but what we see is that Colorado's value of construction pulled back in 2023. We expect it to stabilize in 2024. Construction really took the brunt of, or the residential piece really took the brunt of the decline in 23, but we think that will also be more stable in 2024. So now let's point out Boulder County. I talked about this last year. There's this yellow bar on here, which is the reservoir expansion that really drove a lot of activity in Boulder County. That's a component called non-building, which is infrastructure. So when we include the reservoir that was permitted last year and compare it to this year, that's a decrease of 73% in infrastructure building, okay? But without that, we actually saw about a 30% increase in infrastructure building, excluding the reservoir. So it's sort of interesting. We saw commercial increase 55% and that residential piece decrease 30%. So if you remove the reservoir, overall value of construction in Boulder County increased 1% year over year for the first 11 months of the year. I think that's really remarkable in this funding environment that we're in right now. Now on the residential side, home prices, we all know that they've slowed. There were so many years that Rich and I were up here where all of Colorado's MSAs were on the far left. Now they're on the far right. And when I take a look at this quarter over quarter, it's very similar. They're all sort of oscillating around zero. Building permits, we see residential building permits falling pretty sharply in Colorado. And for a while, this was a concern to me. Like we know we have an affordability issue. We have a housing supply issue. How are we ever going to get this right if we're not building as many homes? But when we draw this trend line here, and I take the simple average of building permits since the mid-90s, we're actually at about that average rate of building permits over that long-term period. So we're sort of back to average right now. Boulder's building permits increased And I think a lot of this has to do with the recovery from the fires. So Superior and Louisville showing up in the Boulder MSA data. But I think it's really unique that Boulder County had an increase in single-family permits. So that's why I attribute it back to the rebuild. This is really unique that there is this increase in single-family permits. And then I love taking a look at the BOLO Realtors data because this provides a snapshot of transactions that have actually occurred over the past year. And what we see is City of Boulder's median price is $1.3 million for single-family homes, but sales are down. The median price is down a little bit, and days on market are up. So, you know, I'm not pretending like things are all good here. The housing market has certainly shown signs of slowing. So closing this out, I'm going to talk about consumption. And Rich already talked about national retail sales. I threw Colorado taxable sales up here just to show you how remarkably close the Colorado taxable sales track national retail activity. So this is one of those leading indicators that we use in our forecasting models. But I will say that Colorado has also been a place that has outperformed consumption nationally. We're also seeing that Colorado is slowing down a little bit ahead of the nation when it comes to that retail activity. And that's true in Boulder, in the city of Boulder as well. So that's what's up here on the slide. It shows that through September, year over year, up 3%. For the month alone, up 0.8%. So, you know, looking back at the prior slide where we're still looking at, 4+% in November, 5+% in December, that suggests that things are slowing more in Boulder. And when we take a look around Colorado, it's not just Boulder where things have been slowing down in terms of retail sales. So this flattening shows up when I put the 12 months up here in these line charts. You can see that there's real normalization from 2022 to 2023. Those lines are sort of almost on top of each other now, so that flattening shows up there. Okay, so I like to do this. I look at state tax collections for the 30 largest taxing jurisdictions in Colorado. So it's the same tax base because it's the state's take, and so we can get a real apples-to-apples comparison for how these communities are doing. And among these top 30, this is comparing 2023 through October to 2019 through October, and it shows that every place is way up to that pre-pandemic year. Commerce City up 60%. That's ridiculous. Boulder's up about 30%. Englewood's up about 11 or 12%. When we take a look at just year over year, though, 2023 to 2022, you see this coming down, right? So Boulder is at about 4%, which is faster than the statewide collection. So Boulder's outperforming the state. But also mind you that there are some places around Colorado, like Pueblo and Castle Rock, that are actually seeing year over year decreases, okay? All right, so Rich started off by talking about some of the risks that we've been eyeing. I'm not gonna read all of these, but I'll leave it up here for just a second. I think that our general consensus is that 2024 will still be a growth year. We expect GDP growth and job growth and income growth and so on. We don't think things will completely come off the rails in 2024. I buy into this idea of rolling recessions, and that's really what I was describing when it came to construction and real estate and tech. But hopefully we work through those sort of incrementally so that it doesn't bring the entire economy down. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Matt Wiggins, who will introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
So first and foremost, thank you so much, Rich and Brian. Great information per usual. Most of the information that you see today is information that the Boulder Economic Council uses on a regular basis for all of our programs, whether it be housing, transportation, workforce development. I will have to say, as opposed to all the CU photographs that we've seen tonight, where they're smiling. Not so much in this one. I'm generally a happy person, but for whatever reason, I was thinking about something else that day, so I apologize. But no, good evening. I'm Matt Wiggins. I'm the Senior Director of Economic Vitality and Special Projects. I'm not sure what that is just yet. I'm hoping it's not watching John's car at some point. But we've heard from our new VP, Joe, and I'm really excited about working with Joe for 2024 and beyond. But I also want to acknowledge the rest of the BEC team who are in the room. Louis Rosner, our data analyst. Go ahead and stand up, Louis. And Olivia Beckstead, who is our economic vitality specialist. So this is a forecast event. 2024 is looking bright, and I can't really share how excited I am for the team that we have for 2024 with the BEC. For those of you who are interested in a copy of Rich and Brian's slides, we're going to be posting those to the website, on the BEC website, so stay tuned for more information. We'll have that at your fingertips. Let's give them one more round of applause because that's a lot of information to put into a booklet. Before we have our next speaker, we do have some promotional giveaways. We have placed 3 surprises at random in the room, and the lucky winners will take home a gift card from Black Belly. So look underneath your chair. See if you find something. Hopefully it's not gum. And when you find it, can you let us know that you found it? Hi, J Doctor. Who else? Hey, there's another one. Is that Cliff? Cliff's got one. And we have another one over here. Congratulations. Enjoy. At this time, please join me in welcoming our third speaker, Elizabeth Garner. Elizabeth is the Colorado State Demographer and has directed the State Demography Office in the Department of Local Affairs since 2004. Elizabeth travels the state talking with Coloradoans about social and economic conditions that are brought about by population shifts. The State Demography Office applies an understanding of demographic trends to challenges in a range of areas, including the state's economy, workforce, education, housing, migration, and rural populations. So join me. I'm a huge fanboy, and that's a callback. You know who you are, who does that. But welcome, Elizabeth.
Fanboy, that's silly. I want to thank you guys so much for having me here today to speak with you. I always enjoy coming up here and always enjoy getting to work with Rich and Brian. And I hope you guys realize, what an incredible resource you guys have with those two. Not only our office gets to leverage them, the entire state gets to leverage them, but they're here in Boulder. So take advantage of them. You've got 2 great folks doing a lot of great work around at the state. So thanks for allowing me to be part of this team today. So what I'm going to really talk about is now what's kind of the demographics behind all of this that you see. And I call it if-then because as economists, I'm an economist by training as well, but most of us are thinking, God, I don't know what's going to happen next. So that's why I say if-then, because, right, we don't know if anything is for sure, but I want you to understand really how things are connected so that we understand, gosh, if something changes next week, how might that impact the work that we do in Boulder, in the state, and, you know, if you're working nationally as well. And, yeah, obviously, I'm totally excited about population, and that's, of course, why it's highlighted. But we know that it drives the economy, right? 70% of the expenditures, whatever, 70% of the economy is driven by consumer expenditures. But we also know that the population is part of that labor force. Also, that age of the population that's so important. It's income levels of that population that are really important. It's some of the characteristics of that population that are really important on both sides in terms of driving the economy as well as participating in the labor force. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. And if you've seen me speak, you're going to say, Elizabeth, you haven't changed your slide deck. Well, that's the beautiful thing about demographics, compared to having to do the economy all the time, is it's really weird. You only change 1 year at a time, right? If you were 25 last year, you're 26 this year. Not a lot of rocket science in the work that I do. So some of the things, like talk about population slowing. Yeah. It's slowing. It's continuing to slow, and guess what? You're going to follow that 50 years out. So you don't have to invite me back for a while. But we see the population is slowing. Why? Slowing births, increasing deaths. And that's a big impact. That's a big impact to Boulder. Boulder, that might be like your main point. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. I don't mean it in a negative, but you are kind of the poster child for it in Colorado. Migration is also slowing, and that's a big impact to the state. Migration and mobility are slowing across the country. We're not just the only place where we're seeing this slowdown, but it has a big impact long run, and more importantly, I think Colorado is slower to this story. We've never had to really compete too hard for the best and the brightest, right? Because you've got places like Boulder, where they're like, sweet, I get to go to this place. In the country, we've got places slowing down. Competition for the best and the brightest is going to get even harder. Both Rich and Brian were talking about the labor force and thinking, or maybe even Joe was talking about it, thinking, will that next year get better? No. No. If you think it's bad now, it's just going to get worse. Don't think of it as a negative story, right? I had one boss, and he goes, oh, and this is one of those sunshine bosses. So he's like, oh, anything that comes up tough, think about the opportunity. And I'm like, yeah, fun. Okay, will do. But think about the opportunity with a tight labor force. And I'll get to that in a minute. Concentrated growth in the Front Range. You saw some of the slides that Brian was showing. 95% of the job growth, 95% of the population growth was in the Front Range over the last decade. And that will also be a story for our future. We're seeing a lot more growth in service-driven economy rather than the goods-producing economy, and where are all of the people in the Front Range? So it kind of creates this self-fulfilling prophecy. Last but not least, aging. And I know you've heard me talk about this for the 20 years I've been here, and that's because what do? We age. And thank goodness, right? The alternative sucks. And so we age, and we need to deal with it. We're still one of the youngest states, but we're the fastest growing states in that aging population, and that has a big impact. And the diversity that we see by age is critical for the success of our future and understanding that. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I don't expect you to see this, especially from the back, but I think it's always important to make sure that you've got data behind what you say to prove different points. We are slowing down as a nation. Last decade was our second slowest decade ever. Yes, we increased by 22 million people, but second slowest decade compared to the Great Recession or Depression in the 1930s. So if the mothership is slowing down, it's going to impact all of the states. Yes, we increased by 745,000 people. Yes, we were in the top 10. We got that 8th congressional seat. But it wasn't the fastest year. It wasn't the fastest decade or slowest decade. It was right in the middle. But since 2010 or 2020, what have we seen? We have seen Colorado slowing down. Total numbers in terms of percentage change, and maybe even more importantly, relative to other states. No longer are we in the top 10, we're in that second top, in the top 20. Our annual average now is like 30,000 a year compared to the last decade, which it was 74,000 a year. A huge departure, but what do you hear media, is anybody from media here? What do you hear media say all of the time? What do we say all of the time? Exponential growth, people flocking to the state. That's just bad info. We aren't, and it's important to talk about it honestly, right? So that we understand what's going on and so we don't freak people out, right? If you say that people are flocking here and that we're growing exponentially and you scare people, then what do you get? You even get more reserved, right? Oh, I don't want flocks. And so thinking about how we talk is really important and why we need people. I'm going to be a little bit pro-people in my, not just because it's my job, but I think there's a benefit that we have of people in the state. If we look at Colorado's growth, on the map on the left-hand side is the growth over the last decade. Red, orange, yellow positive, shades of blue decline. You can see the concentrated growth along the Front Range. Like I said, 95% of the growth in the Front Range for this last decade, as well as 95% of the job growth. But if we look at the right-hand side, this is what's happened since 2020. Red, orange, yellow positive, shades of blue decline. Oh, looky there. Declines in Boulder, Jeffco, Denver. Eastern Plains, which we know about, but people were saying, okay, that kind of makes sense with COVID, right? Emptying out of the cities, Boulder's an expensive place, lost a lot of college students that maybe did online school from home. They said, oh, everybody flocked to the mountains. No. What did we see? We saw a decline in the mountains. So maybe the mountains were busy from visitors, but they didn't make that their residence, so they didn't move to those mountain counties. When we look at total population change, just 3 things that we watch in our office: births, deaths, net migration. Births minus deaths is known as natural increase. That's the blue component. We peaked in 2007. We will never be at that level again, ever. Births minus deaths. Why? Because we see a slowing in births, we see an increase in deaths, not just COVID deaths, but because we're older, we have more people in age groups with higher death rates. The red component is net migration. This chart starts in 1970. You can see our different booms and busts, and that makes sense. When we boom, we need more people. When we bust, we don't. And so you can see that in there, but what you can see is that we have not hit 100,000 in growth since when? Since 2001. There is no flock. Okay, no flocking. Do you see an exponential line really after 2001? No. Okay, so wrong for media to say things like that. We were slowing though pre-pandemic. So this is not just a pandemic slowdown. This is a slowdown because the mothership is slowing down and Colorado is slowing down. And this is what we really need to be thinking about, is how do we move forward at a slower growth rate? So there's a lot of positives to that, right? A lot of people have said, oh, do we need a lot of people? It's like, well, you're not gonna get them now. So we need to think about the benefits of slowing down and how do we manage that. What does Boulder look like? Well, this is Boulder, same idea. Boulder County, and again, the blue you see pretty flat. We've actually started to go a little negative in natural increase. That means there's more deaths than births. Orange is net migration. You can see Everybody's probably looking at that like 2,000 number. That is not your fault, okay? That is just Broomfield. So we create a new county and they suck those people out and you lose them. So that has nothing to do with the economic environment at all. But important to see what that looks like and the fact that we have actually had net outmigration for Boulder County. And it's interesting, it's really driven by domestic outmigration. We've actually seen positive international migration. And it makes sense. You've got a university, it counts international students. Likewise, if you've got professors coming in, business community, if you're bringing in foreign workers, that counts that as well. So you do have a net positive for international, but it's been negative for domestic, positive for international. So I think it's really important to talk about this birth thing because it is the slowing in births that's really pulling down Boulder's growth, but it's also pulling down Colorado and the United States. And you've probably heard, like, yesterday or the day before, CDE, Department of Education, released their enrollment numbers. And people are like, oh, it's because everybody's homeschooling. And I'm like, no, it's because people weren't born. And they're like, what? And I'm like, all right, like this data exists and it's been out there for a long time. We had our peak birth in 2007. That makes our peak person really basically 16, 17 years old. We've got about 8,000 fewer kiddos, fewer births per year today than we had in 2007. For the US, it's 650,000. Fewer births per day. God. Per year. If we look at the United States, this is huge. Red, orange, peach positive, shades of blue decline. In the under 18 population in the country over the last decade due to a slowdown in births. California, Midwest, Northeast, absolute declines in the under 18 population. Yeah, Colorado came out positive, about positive 38,000 in that under 18 population. The previous decade, it was positive at 127,000. So there is a huge slowdown in kiddos. And this matters to you guys, not only in K-12 that you might think about funding in the county and the city. What about higher ed? Higher ed is huge to Boulder, right? Where do we get a lot of our out-of-state students from? California, Midwest, Northeast. Absolute declines in that under 18 population in those states. What about our labor force? Where do we get them from? California, Midwest, Northeast. And apparently Florida. Where's Joe? Joe. And Florida. Now Florida is seeing positive growth in that under 18. We're also seeing growth in Texas. We will always have a source. Now granted, they're Texans, but we're gonna have to adapt. In Colorado, red, orange, yellow positive, shades of blue decline. 43 of the 64 counties had a total decline in that under 18 population over the last decade. It doesn't matter where you were, Eastern Plains, San Luis Valley, Western Slope, Denver Metro, there were declines in that under 18 population. Boulder and Jeffco being the two largest. Jeffco reached their peak school-age population in 2001, and they're just starting to close schools. You know what they did? They stole kids from other counties. Did you know that? That was their, I learned this, that was like their objective, their goal was, oh, we'll just bring them in from out of county, which is legal, right? But it's interesting to see what this looks like for the state and what this is gonna mean to our labor force. Again, our peak person is 15 or 16, 17. So come 3 years, 2 years maybe, they're not going to be entering higher ed. A couple years after that, they're not going to be entering the labor force because they don't exist, because they were never born. And we know, how long does it take to create a good, reasonable person? Like, what, 25-ish years, right? I've got a 23 and I've got a 26, and I'll be honest with you, the 26 is okay. The 23, I love his energy. That's all I have to say. So when we migrate people to Colorado, what kind of people do we migrate? Well, we migrate youngins, 20 to 4-year-olds. Colorado is that red line on this chart, and I threw in Arizona. Oh, sorry, my A kind of fell off there, to show what a state that attracts older adults. So you see Arizona, their peak is kind of in that older adult. Colorado really focused in that 20 to 40. We do not attract older adults. We have got about a net zero in our older adults in terms of net migration. And then I put poor little California in there. So California is the purple line. Look at that little baby line for such a big state. It also attracts those young adults. But look, it's net out migration for every other age group. They actually experience net out migration, and the only way they do grow is actually from natural increase, more births than deaths. So I threw in here Colorado, which is the blue line, compared to Broomfield, which is the green line, compared to yellow, which is the Boulder line, just to see what kind of folks, and you guys know, you attract really young, right? Because you've got the college here, or the university here. And then you've got you've got a net out of like, the 30-somethings. And that happens a lot in university communities where, people leave after they went to school. And then you kind of are pretty flat. It's really hard to attract folks, right, to Boulder because it's a little expensive. But you do get a little bit of a positive in migration, but lose in a lot of, just slightly in that 35 to 40-year-old age group. But look at your friend next door. I wonder where the Boulderites are going. I bet they're going over the border to Broomfield. And we can see that in a lot of other data. It's not just from looking at this pretty picture, that we're seeing that net migration from Boulder to Broomfield as well as Weld County. So you heard a lot about jobs, and obviously there's a huge connection between job growth and population growth. That's why I hang out with Rich and Brian, so that I find out about the job growth, so I understand better what we're going to see in terms of net migration. And we can look at the chart, job growth, blue bars, red line is net migration. When there's stronger job growth, there's stronger net migration. And you're like hearing that out loud, and you're like, duh. And I'm like, yeah, say that again. Because I would tell most of you that we don't get that in our office. We are like, Elizabeth, kind of hate people. And I'm like, you hate people? They're like, yeah, they're on our roads, in our homes, on the ski slope. Joe, on the ski slope? No, but he's a resident. It's good. I'm like, but what do you think about jobs? They're like, I love jobs. Jobs are the best thing in the world. I'm like, okay, but a job is a person, and a housing unit's where that job sleeps at night. How can you be pro-job but anti-people? And they're like, well, I just am. No. But that's what we have to think about, and even more strategically. In a second, I'll tell you why. And you can see actually part of the reason on the chart. In the future, you see stronger migration than job growth. Why? Old people like me, right? What are we going to do? We're going to retire. So when I leave my job and I get somebody to fill my job, that's not a new job. Blue bar is new job. I'm an old job. That's not on here. we're forecasting 40,000 retirements a year through this decade. And it was about 50,000 last decade per year. New jobs plus retirement job creates a huge demand for labor. And that's what that red line is indicating. When we migrate people to Colorado, where do they come from? Red, orange, some color, red, orange, peach-ish, our largest donor states. The blue states are our receiver states. They're the ones that take Coloradoans. And again, you can see California, Midwest, Northeast, largest donor states. What is potentially going to happen to those states? Fewer people to donate. So this really is, I'm not going to say a crisis. I'm going to say we should really be strategically thinking about this. If our largest donor places are experiencing a total decline in the under 18 population, we're going to have to struggle even harder to get those folks, right? Because competition for people. And this is where the economic development community and the business community is critical. Because what is one of the strategies that these other states are doing to get people? They're stealing our youngins by offering lower tuition at their schools than our schools. We have seen the percentage of Coloradoans going out of state to school increase from 17% to now 25%. And I will tell you, I lost my kids as well. Both of them out of state, lower tuition than in state. And what do they do when they leave state? They meet people, fall in love. Now I've got one in Indiana. So we did a trade. We got the dean and you got my son in Indiana. The other one, who knows, she's going to go abroad, mostly foreign. So, but we need to think strategically about that. Is that okay? Are we going to be okay losing more kiddos out of state? Or how are we going to compete for the best and the brightest? Who does Boulder usually get? Red, orange, kind of orange, dark orange, our largest donor counties in the country. Blue are the receiver counties. You can see Weld, you can't really see Broomfield show up on that chart or on that map, but Weld and Broomfield are actually the largest receivers of Boulderites that we have. We can see Southern California, kind of a big donor area. We can see the Eastern Seaboard. We can see Florida. So we know that that's where Joe came from. But important to understand where your competition is, again, for the best and the brightest. Some of that data is old, as you saw. I think that was 21 data, so it didn't really have Joe in there yet. But what do we watch? We look at our relative unemployment rank to understand our competition for attracting the best and the brightest. The red line is net migration. No, the blue line is net migration. The red line is our relative unemployment rank. And it seems to really follow closely. When we have a really low unemployment rate, we're able to attract people to the state. When we've got a high relative unemployment rank to other states, then we don't get people to the state. So since those unemployment numbers come out more often, this is also what we use to kind of feel how competitive Colorado will be for people coming to the state. Right now, we're ranked 21, right in the middle. So are we going to get people? We're going to have to see how competitive we can be to attract and retain. So one choice is to try and migrate people to Boulder, right? That's how you get people. Or you can commute them. And that's what we do in Boulder, right? There's a lot of commuting going on, and I wanted to give you the feel for what that feels like. On the far left panel is in the You can see Boulder. It's highlighted. Those are the jobs in Boulder. Everybody else around it, those are the people that migrate to the jobs, commute to the jobs in Boulder. So you attract folks from all over, really the Front Range, to the jobs that you guys have here in Boulder. If we look at the middle panel, that's another tool to look at this size difference. The dark green circle are the jobs in Boulder City. The light green circle are the workers in Boulder City. So many more jobs than the labor force. If you're having a hard time attracting, retaining, filling positions, a lot of it is you just don't have the labor force. In Boulder City to begin with, if we look at Boulder County, the story gets a smidge better, but still more jobs than absolute workers. And so that's where you learn to make friends with your counties that are on the sides. We look at the Broomfields, we look at the Welds, we look at the Denver metro area, and that might be blasphemy to say out loud, but right, we're looking for strategies. So labor force is tight. It's going to get even tighter. I can only think of being really friendly as a good strategy to start with. And then you've got Joe, who's going to figure it all out for you. But being friendly, I think, is always important. Age is also really important to understand who we are. Why? Because we change everything that we do by age. All of our preferences, how much we spend, where we spend it, how we participate in the labor force, what kind of housing we need, all change based on age. So this is Colorado's age distribution broken down by single year of age. Couple of things. The black line is 65. So it gives you an idea of where we are. You can see the slowdown on this far left-hand side. There are fewer 0-year-olds than there are 60-year-olds. You can see that big stair step between kind of 25 and 30. What happened? We didn't migrate people here for 3 years, and that's what happens. That used to be a nice, pretty curve. Now it's a big stair step. That's the slowdown in net migration. The positive is that we see our peak person is kind of 30, 32. It's our millennial group. One of the benefits that we could be seeing is that we've seen increases in fertility rates for women over the age of 30. We've now got our largest cohort of those millennials aging into that 30 plus. We could see more babies. That's what we could, and that's what I told CDE. I'm like, let's just watch those bursts, see if anything happens. But it's a key piece to understanding that future for Colorado. You can also see the large group of people aging out of the labor force. This is Boulder, right? It makes sense. It fits with the yes, we're number one. It fits with the school population here, but look at that slowdown on that far left-hand side. A pretty big slowdown in the kiddos. And, you know, you don't have a lot of Gen X relative to your boomers. So that's, you know, it's broken down by generation. You've got a little bit more on the millennials in there as a whole, but understanding that slowdown is going to be critical. Now I'm going to compare the city to the county to the state in terms of that age distribution. So the city is that orange line, the county is the blue line, and the red line is Colorado in terms of age distribution. So you can see obviously that key university population there, but the city itself has a much smaller share of youngins, right, of that school-age population. The county has a little bit more, but not up to the level that the state has in terms of that share of that school-age population. When we look at the older population, again, the city's down a little bit less, but the county and the state are at about that same level of that share of the older population, just for comparison purposes. But important to understand, what do we forecast taking all of that data, looking for this next decade? Over this next decade, we are forecasting an absolute decline in that under 18 population for the entire state of about 10,000. 18 to 24, slight growth. The 25 to 44, that says migration. That 18 to 24, or that 25 to 44, we are forecasting growth, but only if we're able to attract and retain. 45 to 64, pretty flat, but look at that 65 plus. If we look at the total numbers underneath, we're forecasting the state to increase by 600,000 people over this next decade, which is much slower than last decade, which was 745,000. 50% of the growth in the state is the population over the age of 65. This is not typically the population that's going to be participating heavily in the labor force. Yes, a lot do, but that's not where we're going to be seeing the growth. A lot of people freak out, especially my housing folks, freak out when they say this. They're like, oh my God, where are we going to put them? And I'm like, don't worry, they already live here, right? This is like me. I'm going to age from the 50 cohort into the 60 cohort this decade. I have a house. Now, granted, people do become housing insecure as they age sometimes, but we don't have net migration of older adults. This is us aging in place, creating that growth. People always ask me, Elizabeth, do we really need people? And I'm like, yeah, come on, people are not that bad. If we had zero net migration this decade, we would have an absolute decline in every single age group except for the 65 plus and a slight growth in the 45 to 64. We would have a total decline in the working age population in the state. So are people good? Yes, people are good. And people create more people. See, you got that, right? We migrate young adults get together with other young adults, and they procreate. That's how we will have more kiddos, is if we have more adults. I know, not rocket science, what I do, in Boulder, what are we looking at? An absolute total decline of 6,000 in the under 18 population for the decade. Growth in age groups, you can see the 45 to 64, same story there, growth there, if you're able to attract and retain. But you will see of that 19,000 total growth, that majority of the growth is forecast in that 65 plus as well. We can look at the impacts over the state for this next decade. On the left-hand side is the school-age population. We absolute decline in school-age population in the Denver metro area, red, orange, yellow positive, shades of blue decline. If we look at the right-hand side, that's the working age population. Lots of our communities to the Eastern Plains, South and Lewis Valley, and even Jeffco forecasting declines in that working age population over this next decade. So these are important things for us to be thinking about. In terms of age, we also need to recognize that who we are changes by our age group in terms of race and ethnicity. On the left-hand side is our population by race and ethnicity. The blue is our white non-Hispanic, and then all of the other colors are our people of color. We can look, especially on the Colorado side, that really almost every age group less than like 30, 35 is a lot more diverse than our population, let's say, over 65. So when we're looking at our market for our goods and services, we've got a much more diverse market to be selling our goods and services to. When we're looking at our labor force, we've got a much more diverse labor force entering into the labor force rather than exiting the labor force. So being strategic is how we're going to win this game in terms of tight labor force. Slowing population growth is making sure that we are incorporating everyone into that new mix. We can look at the same concept for Boulder, a little bit less diverse than the state as a whole. So this is another thing to be strategic about and to think about how do we do this in the county. I'm not going to go into the implications. You can read this, but just remember, age is such an important variable. I'm just 1 second going to talk about housing. Housing is a huge dynamic, an important component for attracting and retaining a labor force. And that price and that supply of housing is critical. We know that Boulder struggles in that area. We know that Colorado struggles in that area. But also be aware of our household growth by age. If we look at the chart for Boulder, you're expected to have a decline in households in the age group under 18, or under 24, so 18 to 24, slight growth in the 25 to 44, decline in the 45 to 64, but most of your growth will also be in households over the age of 65. So thinking strategically also in that housing realm is going to be important, and understanding how hybrid is either a benefit or a drawback to your industry or to the community. I was working with a group yesterday, and they're like, yeah, no competition, we're a loser. And I was like, oh, okay, I like people coming out with a stand. And they're like, no, people can live here and they get offered twice the salary to hold a job in California, and they don't have to move. And I'm like, really, twice? They're like, yep, I've lost 2 people this month to California. Now, California, that's where, and they've got that decline in population, decline in that under 18. So think about, is it a benefit drawback to you, your industry, and to Boulder? But I do think that conditions are getting better. You heard that information from Brian in terms of the housing market. We look at a ratio of total household population to housing units, and it really gets to this concept of tightness. So the bigger the number, the tighter the market, the lower the number, the looser the market. We see that now Colorado is below that average that we've had over this. It starts in 1985. So I think our housing market is also going to be getting better as well, and we'll start to see prices moderate and slow down. And you saw some of that information that Brian had showing that our appreciation is slowing, which then makes us more competitive to other states, because that's in essence, right? That's all we're doing, is competing with other states really for the best and the brightest in the industries. So just to tie things up, when we do our forecast, it is a job demand labor supply model that we run. And that creates our forecast for the population into the future. It's really looking at those jobs that we're forecasting to grow out through 2050 and that potential supply of workers. We understand that we're operating in the context of the United States and that mothership, and understanding that things are slowing down and that competition has increased, that births are slowing, that mobility is slowing, that international migration is uncertain, that we have no control over it, at least yet. So we're going to see this tight labor force. Again, I cannot reiterate, if you think it's tough today, get ready, my friends. This is the time to be strategic and think, how can we attract the best and the brightest? Aging. Please pay attention. Any of you work in an industry that supports older adults? We've got two winners. That's what we like to see, at least 2 winners in any group. Our fastest age cohort by far is the 65 plus, and that does not let down this decade or next. And it's going to even move further into the older adults. So, last decade it was the 65 to 74, now it's the 75 to 84. So thinking strategically about that group, understanding how it's going to drive your economy, and understanding how that's going to affect your labor force. So big picture, all comes down to math, right? We know that there's going to be about 40,000-ish new jobs a year. That's kind of the forecast in the short run right now, next couple of years, and about 40,000 in retirements a year. That creates a demand for 80,000 workers. Can you guys do it? Are you up to the challenge? So we do need to be reimagining what that's going to look like. How does AI fit into it? How does more efficiencies fit into it? How can we be intentional and strategic? How can we be data-driven in how we look at this? I teased about stealing people from Weld and Boulder, or Broomfield, kind of teased about it. Try and add to that labor force rather than stealing it. We need to think about, and we saw these numbers, bringing people in from the sidelines. How do we do that more? We certainly have opportunities where we've got lower labor force participation rates in the young adults and in the older adults like me. How could you repurpose me, right, in the future? And maybe Rich alluded to the fact that he was the older guy in his department. How do you repurpose older workers? How do you help us participate in the labor force longer? People with disabilities. This is a boon for people that have been marginalized over the decades in the labor force. So thinking about how we bring in people with disabilities. How do we bring in people of color that maybe aren't as high labor force participation rates as other groups? How about people justice involved, where it's almost impossible to get a job? Thinking strategically about these marginalized groups, I think, is also really important. So this is our forecast, 3 pretty lines. We are forecasting births to increase. Why? Because we're forecasting net migration to increase. So that's part of that forecast, but there's a lot of uncertainty. If we don't get those migrants, we don't get those babies. So the two go together on that piece. Unfortunately, the deaths, pretty certain. We will continue. People keep dying the way they always have. And so we are still forecasting that increase in deaths out into the future simply because we've got a larger age group and people with higher death rates. But we're forecasting the state to increase by about 1.7 million between 2020 and 2050. You hear that word 1.7, you're like, oh my God, I thought she said slowing down. That is slowing down, and 50% of that is growth in the people over the age of 65. And I bet almost all of us by 2050 will be in that age group. And so that is driving a lot of the growth, are the people that are here that are aging in place. And I think that's all I want to say on that. There's a lot of uncertainties. Always know that there are uncertainties. That's why we meet with you every year, right? International migration, water, housing, big uncertainties for Colorado. Industry changes, state forecast, budget, huge. Know that we're always thinking about these different factors and how they fit into the piece. But with that, I want to thank you guys so much for your time and inviting me to this great event. Contact information if you need me for anything that you do. Thanks.
All righty. Elizabeth, thank you for that informative, entertaining presentation. And we're about to wrap things up here. But one thing Brian had mentioned was what draws people to Boulder. And it made me think about that. Like why did I choose Boulder? And one, the location, the vibrancy of the community in the mountains, the position itself, economic development or economic vitality with the chamber. And the third thing is what I've learned is what you do and where you do, what's most important there is also who you work for. And I will tell you, as I was looking at different opportunities, I checked all those boxes. And, John, thank you so much. He's not, where is he? There he is. Thank you for reading my letter. And that was very touching. And also, though, if you notice, I kind of have a little bit of passion in my personality. John has that passion in his personality. So we hit it off. And that really was the deciding factor, was being able to work for John. I do want to give a shout out to the amazing Boulder team. They're so welcoming and great. And I'm very excited to be working with Matt, Olivia, and Lewis. Matt did pose a question about what the special projects were. So if you saw Matt's face over there, that's when I did tell him, yes, it does include washing my car. So that's why he had no smile that day. And again, thank you for being here today. I want to thank Brian Dr. Richard, Elizabeth, and Dean Khatri for your insightful presentations. And let's build upon the momentum generated today and really continue to advance Boulder as an even more vibrant, more thriving, and diverse economy. By working together, we are going to create that future that's filled with prosperity, inclusivity, and resilience. And let's see, a couple things. For those interested in a copy of today's content, we're going to post them on our website, and we're going to be sending them out in mail. Once again, thank you to those people who logged in remotely. And before we conclude our program, we have a couple of just shout-outs again to our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, Elevations Credit Union. Community sponsor, City of Boulder. Supporting sponsors, Berg, Greenleaf, University, BOK Financial, Ide Bailey, Plant Moran, University of Colorado. Contributing sponsors, Flatirons Crossing 29th Street. Media sponsors, Daily Camera, Biz West. Our next event, be on the lookout for our next summit in 2024. It will be this fall. We do have the Celebration of Leadership coming up on March 13th. Thank you for joining us today. Joining us at the reception afterwards here. And again, we look forward to working with you and creating a very bright, prosperous year. Reach out to me. I'd love to meet with you, coffee, lunch, dinner, and really just kind of get your insights in regards to how we can create this vibrant economy, because we're on that tipping point. It's going to happen, and we appreciate your support. Have a great evening.